In one of the most luxurious restaurants in the city, a black man sat quietly enjoying his dinner. He was dressed elegantly and had a calm demeanor, but no one knew that he was the FBI captain. Suddenly, someone called. A white police officer walked in, his eyes filled with arrogance. He saw him, and immediately the situation became extremely tense. What happens next? Let's explore this dramatic story. At night, New York City lights shine brightly on the bustling streets. In the luxurious Manhattan area, luxurious restaurants light up, welcoming the upper class to enjoy dinner. Malcolm Carter stepped out of a shiny black SUV, his neat suit hugging his tall, muscular figure. FBI captain. That title earned respect from many. But tonight, Malcolm just wanted to be an ordinary diner, enjoying a quiet dinner after a stressful week of work. He entered the La Maison Rouge restaurant, a place that only served the rich and politicians. The atmosphere was luxurious, with candles flickering on every table. The soft piano music made everything more elegant. But as soon as Malcolm reached the front desk, the manager frowned in displeasure. A black man in a suit walking into an upscale restaurant? This was rare. "Sorry, the restaurant is full today," the manager said, his voice not friendly at all. Malcolm frowned. He looked around. There were clearly at least 3 empty tables. "Are you sure?" Malcolm asked again, his voice calm but sharp. The manager was confused, his eyes averted. He didn't expect this man to react like that, but before he could find a way to politely chase Malcolm away, he pulled a card from his wallet and placed it on the reception desk. VIP membership card. This is a card that is only given to special customers who contribute huge amounts of money to the restaurant. The manager's expression immediately changed. "Ah, sorry, sir. I didn't recognize you. Please follow me." He reluctantly led Malcolm to a table near the window, but clearly, the discomfort was still evident on his face. Malcolm looked around silently as he ordered. The waiters moved between tables, chatting cheerfully with customers. But when they came to his table, they were much colder. A white couple sitting at the next table stared at Malcolm. The husband whispered in his wife's ear, then they both snickered. "A black guy sitting here alone? That's weird." Malcolm didn't react. He was used to these situations, but that didn't mean he accepted it. He raised his hand to call the waiter. 5 minutes passed, no one came. The white customers who arrived later were served first. A couple who had been in less than 2 minutes were already being poured wine and brought bread. Malcolm chuckled. A familiar game. "Sorry," he said. A young waitress hurried over but looked extremely reluctant. "What do you need?" Her voice was dry without any respect. "Give me a glass of red wine, and bring the menu." The waitress did not answer, turned around and left immediately. Malcolm took a deep breath, fighting back his frustration. This was something many black people faced every day. At a nearby table, the white couple continued to glance at Malcolm with questioning eyes. The wife frowned, pulled her husband's hand, and whispered, "He looks dangerous to me. What if he's a gangster?" The husband nodded. "We should do something. We can't let a suspicious person sit here." And then they called the restaurant manager. "We don't feel safe having this stranger here." The manager understood what they meant. Even without any proof, if a white customer felt unsafe, he had reason to act. He nodded, took out his phone, and called the police. "Hello, 911. I would like to report a suspicious person at La Maison Rouge restaurant. A black male is harassing customers. He may be carrying a weapon." Not long after, a patrol car stopped in front of the restaurant with its siren blaring. A white policeman walked in, his gait full of arrogance. Officer Bradley Ross. a man known for his racist attitudes but never disciplined. Ross walked in, asked no questions, didn't investigate, and went straight to Malcolm's desk. "What the hell are you doing here?" Ross shouted. The whole restaurant was silent. Malcolm slowly put down his glass and looked up at Ross. "Excuse me? I don't understand what you mean." Ross sneered, crossing his arms over his chest. "A black guy alone in this fancy restaurant? Don't fuck with me." Malcolm smirked. He had heard this line 100 times in his life. "So did I break any laws, officer? Violation?" Ross curled his lips. "I just want to make sure you're not a criminal." That statement made some white guests giggle. Malcolm remained calm. "I'm just having dinner. I can leave if you don't mind." But Ross didn't let it stop there. He pulled out a gun and pointed it at Malcolm. The air froze. Some customers screamed. The waiters cowered in fear. "Want to try your luck?" Ross smirked. "I'll give you 3 seconds to get out of here." Malcolm remained still, showing no fear. He slowly pulled out his phone and held it up in front of Ross's face. Ross laughed. "Call a lawyer? Or call your mother? You have no chance." But the next second, Ross was stunned when he heard Malcolm say, "Hello, Director of the New York City Police Department. This is FBI Captain Malcolm Carter. I was held at gunpoint by one of your officers without cause at La Maison Rouge restaurant." Ross's face turned pale. The customers exclaimed in surprise. Ross's whole life begins to fall apart. The whole restaurant fell into deathly silence. Officer Bradley Ross stood frozen, the gun in his hand starting to shake. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. FBI captain? He had been arrogant to many black people, threatening them, humiliating them, and no one had done anything about it. But this time, he had made a fatal mistake. At the next table, the white couple who had called the police now stared wide-eyed. The husband swallowed hard, and the wife paled, her hands shaking as she realized they had just put a police officer through hell. Some other customers whispered, in disbelief, "Is he really FBI? Oh my God, that officer is dead." The waiters, who had previously ignored Malcolm, now had a pale face. The restaurant manager broke out in a sweat, realizing that discriminating against a high-ranking official was a big mistake. Ross stammered, You're lying! I don't believe it! You can't be the FBI!" Malcolm was calm, still holding the phone to his ear. "Okay, then wait a moment." His voice was calm, but contained a deadly fear. "I am reporting this incident directly right now to the New York Police Department chief. He can confirm my identity immediately." Ross took a breath, his hand tightening on the gun. Malcolm still showed no fear. He adjusted his collar, then turned the phone to speakerphone. "Malcolm, what's going on?" An authoritative voice rang out. None other than the director of the New York Police Department, Donald Reynolds. Ross's face was pale, and his breathing was rapid. The top brass of the police department is listening to this conversation. Malcolm looked straight at Ross, his eyes sharp as a knife. "Sir, I am being held at gunpoint by one of your officers in a fancy restaurant simply because I am a black man eating alone." Reynolds paused for a few seconds, then asked in an extremely serious voice, "His name?" Malcolm said nothing, just stared at Ross. Ross swallowed, knowing he was done for. The white customers who had previously despised Malcolm now looked at him with fear. The restaurant manager stepped back, sweat pouring down his face, stammering, "Sir, I don't know. Please forgive me." The young waitress was startled and tried to be nice by bringing Malcolm another glass of water, but he didn't even look at her. They all started to panic, realizing that they had just discriminated against a high-ranking FBI official. Ross was still panicking when at that moment another police officer walked in. It was Lieutenant James Howard, Ross's immediate superior. Howard looked around, then walked quickly to Malcolm, nodding respectfully. "Captain Carter, I apologize for this incident. We will handle it immediately." Ross turned to look at Howard, his face pale. "Howard, you can't let them—" Pop! Howard slapped Ross straight across the face, knocking him off his chair. The whole restaurant was stunned. "Are you crazy, Ross?" Howard growled. "You just pointed a gun at an FBI captain and you dare say that?" Ross looked around in panic, seeking help from the white customers from before. But now they were all silent. No one wanted to get involved with him. He understood that everything had collapsed. Malcolm looked down at Ross, his voice cold. "I've seen cops like you, Ross. You think you can step on black people, insult them, threaten them with impunity?" Ross clenched his fists, but didn't dare say anything. Howard stepped forward and placed his hand on Malcolm's shoulder. "Captain Carter, I will make sure he is suspended immediately." Malcolm nodded slightly, then picked up his glass and calmly took a sip. Ross stared at Malcolm, his eyes filled with hatred and humiliation. But he knew. His life ended here. Howard shook his head in disappointment, then pulled out his walkie-talkie. "Sir, this is Lieutenant Howard. I need an inspection team to La Maison restaurant immediately." "Reason?" A voice came over the intercom. "Officer Bradley Ross abused his power, threatened an innocent citizen, and opened fire in a restaurant without just cause." Ross jumped up. "Howard, you can't do this to me, I just—" "Shut up, Ross," Howard interrupted, his voice full of authority. "You pointed a gun at the FBI captain, then insulted him in the middle of a fancy restaurant. You think you'll get away with it?" Ross was stunned, his face pale. I didn't know he was FBI." "Oh? So if he was just a normal black man, you think you have the right to curse, threaten, and point a gun at his head?" Howard emphasized each word, his eyes sharp as knives. Ross was speechless. The whole restaurant was dead silent. Everyone present felt the seriousness of this incident. Malcolm took a sip of his drink, then placed the glass down on the table gently, but with authority. "Officer Ross?" Ross started, looking straight at Malcolm. "Today you were lucky. If I wasn't FBI, you would have shot me, right?" Ross opened his mouth to speak, but then fell silent, because he himself wasn't sure of the answer. Malcolm stood up and walked in front of Ross, his eyes as sharp as a knife. "I will not let this go. Not only are you suspended, but you will also face a federal investigation for abuse of power, racial discrimination, and death threats." Ross took a deep breath. He knew his life ended here. Just then, the restaurant door opened. A group of reporters and journalists suddenly appeared, cameras and microphones raised. A female reporter approached Malcolm, her voice urgent. "Sir, we have received information that a police officer pointed a gun at an FBI official right here in this restaurant. Can you confirm, is that true?" Malcolm glanced at Howard, then turned back to the crowd of reporters. "I won't say much at this time. But there is one thing I can say. No one, including the police, has the right to abuse their position to oppress and threaten people just because of the color of their skin." Malcolm's words echoed loudly, causing the whole restaurant to fall silent. Even the reporters were stunned. Ross took a step back, sweat pouring down his face. He couldn't believe it. This was all over the news? In a split second, his image would be broadcast nationwide. His career, his reputation, his life, all ruined in one evening. Ross turned to look at Howard, trying to plead. "Howard, please, don't let this get out to the media. I have a family. Howard looked at him with contempt. "You had the chance to stop, but you didn't. Now face the consequences." Ross collapsed into his chair, head bowed. For the first time in his life, he felt the powerlessness that he had inflicted on so many black people. The restaurant manager was frightened and rushed towards Malcolm. "Sir, I apologize for what happened. If you can forgive us, we—" Malcolm just glanced, then turned away. "No need. What happened today is enough for me to know how your restaurant treats its customers." The restaurant manager turned pale, understanding that his establishment could be seriously affected. Not long after, a group of police inspectors entered. Howard ordered Ross's immediate arrest. 2 police officers approached and handcuffed Ross in front of a crowd of reporters and customers. Ross bowed his head, eyes red with anger and humiliation. Malcolm looked on, saying nothing. Ross was bundled into a police car and taken away for questioning that same night. From here, he will have to face indefinite suspension, investigation into abuse of power, possibility of dismissal and prosecution. For him, this was not just a job loss, but a complete collapse. That evening, as Ross was being taken away, the first news of the incident began to spread on social media. His career is officially over. Within hours of Ross's arrest, social media exploded with videos and posts about the incident. White cop points gun at black FBI captain. The truth about racism in the police force is exposed once again. Officer Ross could face prison time. Major media channels such as CNN, MSNBC, and the New York Times reported the news. The online community was in an uproar, with millions of shares and comments flooding everywhere. If he wasn't the FBI captain, this would have been buried. Officer Ross needs to pay for what he did. This is why we need to reform the police force. Not only that, many high-ranking government officials have also begun to speak out, calling for a broader investigation into racism in the police force. The next morning, Ross was formally brought to court. His lawyer tried to argue that it was just a misunderstanding, but surveillance camera evidence and witness testimony completely refuted this argument. Ross was charged with threatening behavior with weapons, abuse of power, racist action, endangering the lives of others. After many days of investigation, the jury announced the verdict. Ross was sentenced to 5 years in prison. The news spread across the country, becoming a major lesson in the responsibility and consequences of police misconduct. After the verdict was announced, Malcolm left the courtroom, walking out into the crowd of waiting reporters. A journalist approached and asked, "Do you have anything to say about this verdict?" Malcolm calmly replied, "I'm not happy to see a police officer go to jail, but I believe justice has been served." Today, an important message was sent. No one is above the law, not even the police. Not long after, the city's police chief also announced a reform of the police force aimed at eliminating racist officers. Malcolm quietly observed all these changes. Not happy, not sad, simply knowing that he had done the right thing. After Ross was sentenced to 5 years in prison, the story did not end. The media continued to exploit the injustice in the police system. Protests broke out across the United States, especially in major cities such as New York, Chicago, Los Angeles. In Washington, D.C., thousands of people marched with banners, "Justice for all, not just for the powerful. End police abuse." If the FBI is treated like this, what about ordinary black people? The tension has prompted the Justice Department to step in, promising to expand its investigation into racial discrimination in policing. Not only did Ross suffer the consequences, but the police station where he worked was also in big trouble. An internal investigation was conducted and found that at least 5 other officers had engaged in abusive and discriminatory behavior. All were immediately suspended. An anonymous officer admitted to the press, "Ross is not an isolated case. There are many people like him in the police force, and if it weren't for this incident, they would still be at large." These words added fuel to the fire, forcing the government to take even stronger action. But things are not that simple. A former employee of the restaurant spoke out, saying that this was not the first time the restaurant had engaged in racist behavior. She posted on Twitter, "I used to work as a server at La Maison, and I can confirm that they have treated black customers unfairly on many occasions. They set tables far from the windows, serve them slowly, and even refuse to serve them if they don't fit the bill." The article went viral, receiving more than 1 million likes and shares. A series of former customers also spoke up, recounting bad experiences at the restaurant. Under great pressure, the restaurant owner announced that it would temporarily close to reorganize all staff and service procedures. But would anyone want to come back after this scandal? After the incident, Malcolm became an icon. Many civil rights organizations invited him to speak about racism in the legal system, but Malcolm simply declined. "I don't want to be famous. I just want to do my job." Still, he knew his story had helped change something. What about Ross? After his conviction, he became a symbol of police corruption. In prison, he received no special treatment. The black prisoners, many of whom had probably been victims of men like him, looked at him coldly. In just the first few months, Ross was attacked twice, forcing the prison guards to place him in isolation for protection. He completely collapsed. From an arrogant policeman, he became a man living in fear every day. But the most terrifying thing wasn't the prisoners inside. It was the fact that the entire outside world had turned its back on him. A few months later, when the storm had died down, Malcolm resumed his work at the FBI. But this time, he had a new motivation. "I have seen firsthand how this system works, and I will do everything I can to change it. Although the road ahead is long, at least one brick has been laid." Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you like this content, please click like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next meaningful stories, because tomorrow we will have another meaningful story for you.